What are JMS headers and what are the various JMS headers you are aware of? Every JMS message includes message header fields that are always passed from the producer to the consumer. The purpose of these header fields is to provide or convey additional information to the consumer outside the normal content of the message itself. The JMS provider, the MOM providers like ActiveMQ, can set some of these fields automatically after a message is sent to the consumer. But the message provider or the producer has the opportunity to set some of these fields programmatically. The first of the JMS headers is the JMSCorrelationID. This field provides a way to correlate related messages. This is normally used for a request-response scenario, wherein an application sends a message to the consumer which consumes it, and it will take the correlation ID, put it back and send a response back to the application. That way, the producer or application 1 will know that this is a response to the message that it has sent earlier. They will be exchanging the same correlation ID back and forth. We should take care and we should not use the string ID in the correlation ID. If the producer is generating the correlation ID, we shouldn't include the string ID. If the MOM provider is generating it, then it's okay. It already knows because the string ID is reserved for the MOM providers when they generate message IDs. The next is JMSDestination. The JMSDestination header field specifies the destination for a message. This is either a queue or a topic. The JMS provider sets this field automatically when the message is sent or send message is called on the producer side. JMSExpiration, as the name itself says, this header field specifies the expiration time or time to live value for a message. If the value is set to 0, the message will never expire. When a message does expire, the JMS provider typically will discard the message. Also, any persistent messages will be deleted based on the expiration values. JMSDeliveryMode. The JMSDeliveryMode header field specifies persistent or non-persistent messaging. When using persistent messaging, the message is stored to a persistent store like a database or a file system. When using persistent messaging, the send method is not considered to be successful until a message is stored. Messages that are not set or messages that are set as non-persistent are not stored and can be lost if there is a system failure. A persistent message will be delivered as long as the send method is successful. If you need to ensure that the messages are delivered, you should consider using persistent messages. So the MOM providers will make sure that the messages are never lost if we use the persistent messaging. Setting up the persistent messaging is a little work, generally requires some configuration. We'll have to tell the MOM providers which database to use or how to use the file system. But once configured, the MOM providers like ActiveMQ will take care of it for us. JMSMessageld. This contains a value that uniquely identifies each message sent by the provider. This value is set by the provider automatically and returned to the message producer when the send method completes. All JMS message ID values must start with a ID prefix. We got to be careful. If we are using different MOM providers within our organization, then we should always remember that these message IDs are unique for a MOM provider. They will not be unique across the providers. JMS Priority. JMS defines 10 priority levels, 0 through 9. 0 is the lowest priority level and 9 is the highest. Levels 0 to 4 indicate a range of normal priorities and levels 5 to 9 indicate a range of expedited priority. priority level 4 is typically the default for a message. A message priority might not be honored all the times by the JMS provider. Although you set the message priority, it's up to the JMS provider whether to honor it or not. The JMS specification does not force a provider to adhere to the priority under any circumstance. Be careful while using the value for event important messages. Don't rely just on the priority because the mom providers might not comply to it. JMS redelivered. This header indicates that the message probably was delivered to the consumer previously, but the client did not acknowledge the message. If your application is very sensitive to duplicate messages, you probably want to inspect this field and decide whether you want to pay attention to the message or ignore it. So this is to overcome duplicate messaging. JMSReply To, again as the name itself says, the header field indicates whether the response should be, where the response should be sent. If this field is null, then no response is expected. A message with a null value in the JMSReply To header field is sometimes referred to as JMS datagram. If JMSReply To field is not null, it should contain either a queue or a topic. Just because there is a value for the JMSReply To field doesn't mean a client must send a response. It's up to the client application to determine whether a response is necessary. If a reply is sent, the client can send a JMSCorrelationID and the response can be matched up with the request. JMS timestamp. The provider sets the JMS timestamp header field in the JMS message at the time the message is sent. A producer may inform the JMS provider that it does not need the JMS timestamp field set. This might help increase performance by reducing the overhead in getting and setting the current timestamp value for every message sent. So unless you want the timestamp, you can always ask the JMS provider not to set it. As a producer, you can tell it. Finally, the JMS type. The JMS type message is very flexible. There is no strict definition for it in the JMS specification. It's entirely up to the JMS vendor or application how to use this. However, it is recommended that we set this field to something rather than leaving it to null. So from this lecture, you have learned the various JMS message header types.